The arrow whistled past Michael's ear, with a sound like tearing silk, embedding itself 3 in deep in the blue bark of the massive tree behind him. Shaft still vibrated from the impact as he grabbed Luna's hand tighter, his calloused fingers wrapping around her small blue ones as he pulled the 8-year-old girl through the dense alien forest. Behind them, the hunting parties. Shouts echoed through the twisted canopy. Above, their voices a mixture of guttural roars and sharp clicking sounds that made his skin crawl. Sarah stumbled beside them, her once pristine designer dress now torn and mud-stained, hanging in tatters that caught on every thorn and branch. Her face was streaked with dirt and alien pollen that glowed faintly, the perpetual twilight of this world, and her carefully manicured nails were broken and bleeding from their desperate flight. This was a far cry from the pristine mansion in Beverly Hills they had called home just 3 days ago, when their biggest worry had been whether the new security system would keep the paparazzi away from their secret. This way, Luna whispered, her large violet eyes scanning the undergrowth with an intensity that still unsettled Michael. After 3 years of raising her, at 8 years old, she moved through this hostile landscape with an instinct that defied her age and upbringing, her bare feet finding purchase on the slick, moss-covered ground where he and Sarah slipped and struggled with every step. Her blue skin seemed to shimmer in the strange light that filtered through the canopy, and Michael noticed that the luminescent fungi that clung to the tree trunks grew brighter when she passed, as if responding to her presence. The blue-furred predators that stalked this world had picked up their scent hours ago when they had first emerged from the portal. In a clearing of crystalline flowers that sang in the wind, Michael could hear their low, rumbling calls growing closer with each passing minute, communicating in a language that sounded like grinding stone mixed with the whistle of wind through caves. The sounds made his teeth ache and his vision blur at the edges, some subsonic component that human ears weren't meant to process. He gripped his makeshift spear tighter, the sharpened piece of metal salvaged from their crashed escape pod slick with sweat in his palm. Weapon was crude, little more than a shard of twisted hull plating lashed to a straight branch with strips torn from his shirt, but it was all they had against the massive beasts that ruled this planet. Through gaps in the trees, he had caught glimpses of their pursuer, creatures the size of bears, but built like wolves with intelligence gleaming in their amber eyes and opposable thumbs on their front paws that allowed them to use tools. 3 days earlier, everything had been different. Michael and Sarah Miller had been living their carefully constructed lie in their Beverly Hills mansion, a sprawling estate hidden behind high walls and sophisticated security systems. To the outside world, they were a wealthy but reclusive couple who had made their fortune in tech investments. No one knew about Luna, the blue-skinned child they had bought from an underground auction in the depths of Los Angeles 3 years ago. The auction had been held in a converted subway tunnel beneath the city, lit by flickering torches and filled with the kind of people who trafficked in the impossible. Michael remembered the smell of damp concrete and fear, the way the shadows seemed to move independently of their sources. The auctioneer had been a thin man with filed teeth who spoke in riddles about exotic acquisitions and specimens of unusual providence. Luna had been 5 then, huddled in a cage, barely large enough for a dog, her violet eyes wide with terror and incomprehension. Her blue skin had been dulled by malnutrition and abuse, and she had flinched away from every human touch. The bidding had been fierce. Millionaires and government agents competing for the chance to own something that shouldn't exist. Michael and Sarah had outbid them all, driven by an impulse they couldn't explain. They had told themselves they were saving her, giving her a chance at a normal life. They had named her Luna after the way her skin seemed to glow in moonlight, and for 3 years they had tried to be the parents she had never known. But Luna was far from normal. Her skin didn't just glow in darkness, it pulsed with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat, creating patterns of light that seemed to shift based on her emotions. Electronic devices malfunctioned around her when she was upset, screens flickering with static that formed impossible geometric shapes. And every night without fail she drew symbols on the walls of her room with her fingers, leaving traces of phosphorescent light that faded by. Morning, the symbols had been there. First clue that Luna was more than just a lost child. Sarah, who had a PhD in anthropology, had recognized some of the patterns as astronomical notations, star charts that depicted constellations visible from Earth but oriented in ways that suggested a different perspective, a different point of origin. The symbols weren't random artistic expressions. They were maps, navigation aids that showed the location of something Luna called the doors between worlds. But then Agent Collins had found them. Michael's mind raced back to that terrible morning when the black SUVs had surrounded their home like sharks, circling wounded prey. He had been in his study reviewing investment portfolios when the first vehicle had crashed through the main gate. Sarah had been in the garden with Luna, teaching her about earth flowers when armed figures in tactical gear had swarmed over the walls. Collins had been different from the other agents, calm where they were aggressive, surgical where they were blunt. He was a thin man with cold gray eyes and prematurely white hair, wearing an expensive suit that somehow looked more threatening than any amount of body armor. He had walked into their living room as if he owned it, his polished shoes clicking on the marble floor, and placed a manila folder on the coffee table between them. Inside the folder had been photographs, Luna as a toddler, being loaded into a transport vehicle. Luna at age 3, strapped to a medical examination table while technicians in hazmat suits took tissue samples. Luna at 4, sitting in a white room while doctors tested her blood and monitored her brain activity. And finally Luna at 5, the day she had disappeared from the facility that had held her. "We know what she is," Collins had said simply, his voice carrying the flat authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "And we know what she can do." What Luna could do was remarkable and terrifying. The symbols she drew weren't just star charts, they were functional navigation tools that somehow interacted with hidden machinery left behind by her people. Scattered across Earth were ancient portals, gateways between worlds that had been dormant for millennia. Luna could sense their locations with the same instinct that guided migratory birds, and her touch could activate systems that humanity was only beginning to understand. The government had been studying her people for decades, Collins explained with clinical detachment. They called them the predecessors, an alien species that had visited Earth in the distant past and left behind technology that defied conventional physics. Most of their artifacts were inert museum pieces that revealed nothing about their origins or purpose. But occasionally, very rarely, they found something that still functioned. Children like Luna were the key, born with the genetic markers necessary to interface with predecessor technology. They could activate systems that remained invisible to human science. The government had been collecting them for years, studying them in facilities hidden from public view, trying to unlock the secrets of interstellar travel. She's not a person to you, Sarah had said, her voice shaking with rage and fear. She's a tool. Collins had smiled then, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. She's the future of human civilization. Do you have any idea what it would mean to have access to interstellar portals, to be able to colonize other worlds, to escape the limitations of our solar system? Michael and Sarah had refused to hand Luna over. The argument that followed had been brief and violent. Collins's agents had moved to take Luna by force, advancing on the terrified child with restraint devices and sedative injectors. But as they closed in, something extraordinary had happened. Luna had pressed her small hand against the wall, against one of the symbols she had drawn there the night before. The mark had begun to glow bright enough to hurt their eyes, and the wall itself had started to dissolve, not cracking or breaking, but simply ceasing to exist, as if reality had been erased with a cosmic eraser. Beyond the dissolved wall had been not the neighboring room, but a swirling vortex of stars and impossible colors, a portal to somewhere else, somewhere far from Earth and the men who wanted to cage her. Jump, Luna had whispered to them, her young voice carrying an authority that belonged to someone far older. Without thinking, trusting in the child they had come to love more than their own lives, Michael and Sarah had leaped into the unknown. The transit had been indescribable, a sensation of falling through liquid starlight while their minds struggled to process sensory input that had no earthly equivalent. Time had stretched and compressed, seconds feeling like hours, while centuries passed in the blink of an eye. Michael remembered screaming, though whether from terror or wonder he couldn't say. They had emerged in this place, this world where the sky burned orange and the trees grew in impossible spirals toward twin suns that never seemed to move in their courses. The air was thick and humid, so dense it felt like breathing through wet cloth, and filled with the calls of creatures that had never known Earth's touch. Every breath tasted of copper and ozone, with an underlying sweetness that made their tongues tingle and their vision sharpened to unnatural clarity. Gravity was wrong too, lighter than Earth's by perhaps 20%, making every step feel like a small leap. It should have been liberating, but instead it was disorienting, leaving them constantly off balance and struggling to judge distances. Luna seemed unaffected by the change, moving with the same fluid grace she had always possessed. But Michael and Sarah stumbled and lurched like drunks learning to walk. The landscape was alien in ways that defied description. The trees weren't trees at all, but living crystal formations that happened to be shaped like familiar forms. Their leaves were thin sheets of mineral that rang like bells when the wind touched them, creating a constant symphony of harmonics that made concentration difficult. The ground beneath their feet was spongy and warm, covered in what looked like moss but felt like living carpet, complete with a pulse that matched their heartbeats. Strange flowers dotted the landscape, their petals made of what appeared to be condensed light that shifted colors. Based on the angle of observation, some were massive, easily 10 ft across, while others were tiny gems that glittered like scattered diamonds. All of them watched the newcomers with organs that weren't quite eyes, tracking their movement with an intelligence that was definitely not plant-like. The animals were even stranger, bird-like creatures with translucent wings soared overhead, their bodies trailing streams of phosphorescent particles that created temporary constellations in the orange sky. Something that might have been a deer if deer were made of liquid mercury and had too many legs bounded through the crystal trees, leaving no footprints on the spongy ground. And everywhere, always just at the edge of vision, were the watchers' shapes that might have been rocks or roots until they moved, revealing themselves as something altogether more unsettling. But most disturbing of all were the blue fur hunters that had found them within hours of their arrival. These creatures were clearly intelligent, using tools and tactics that spoke of sophisticated reasoning. They had tracked the family through the alien landscape with methodical precision, never hurrying, never falling behind, maintaining a distance that suggested they were herding their prey rather than simply pursuing it. Another arrow struck the tree beside Sarah's head, close enough that she felt the fletching brush her cheek. The hunting party was gaining ground, their calls becoming more frequent and urgent. Michael could see them now through the crystal foliage, massive shapes moving with surprising stealth through the alien underbrush. "We need to find higher ground," Michael gasped, his lungs burning from the thick atmosphere. The alien air was rich oxygen but carried particles that made his throat raw and his eyes water. Every breath was an effort, and he could see that Sarah was struggling even more than he was, her face pale beneath the grime, and her breathing labored. Luna nodded and pointed toward the ridge of black stone that jutted from the forest like a broken finger, its surface smooth and reflective as volcanic glass. "There," she said, her voice steady despite their circumstances, "we can see more from up there." They climbed, tearing their hands on the razor-sharp volcanic rock. The stone was warm to the touch, radiating heat from some internal source, and it left black stains on their skin that glowed faintly in the perpetual twilight. Behind them, the blue-furred hunters crashed through the undergrowth with increasing urgency, their calls taking on a tone that Michael interpreted as frustration or anger. The ascent was treacherous, the volcanic glass offering handholds that cut like razors while providing barely enough grip to support their weight. Sarah's hands were soon slick with blood, and Michael could feel warm wetness running down his palms where the stone had bitten deep. Only Luna seemed unaffected, her blue skin apparently more resistant to the cutting edges, or perhaps she simply knew how to climb this type of formation. Halfway up the ridge, Michael made a disturbing discovery. The stone wasn't natural volcanic glass at all, but some kind of artificial material, perfectly smooth and formed into geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly. It was a structure, he realized with growing amazement, a building or monument created by intelligence but built to scales that dwarfed human architecture. They climbed past carved symbols that matched the ones Luna drew on her walls, past architectural details that followed No earthly aesthetic, arches that folded back on themselves in impossible ways. Stairs that led in directions that shouldn't exist, windows that showed different views depending on the angle of observation. It was beautiful and terrifying, a testament to engineering capabilities that made human achievements look like children's toys. The realization hit him just as they crested the ridge and looked down into the valley beyond. Below them stretched a vast plain filled with structures that defied description. A city built by minds that thought in ways fundamentally different from human consciousness. Twisted spires of the same black material rose from the valley floor like frozen tornadoes connected by bridges that seemed to float in midair without visible support. But the most stunning sight was the inhabitants. Hundreds of blue-skinned figures moved among the structures with fluid grace, their forms similar to Luna's but clearly adult, clearly native to this place. They wore no clothing that Michael could identify, their skin covered instead with intricate patterns of scarification that glowed with the same phosphorescent light that emanated from Luna when she was emotional. "My people," Luna said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that belonged to someone far older than 8 years. There was recognition in her tone and something else, a longing that broke Michael's heart. The hunting party burst from the forest below, but instead of giving chase up the ridge, stopped. Their leader, a massive creature with azure fur and intelligent amber eyes, looked up at Luna and made a series of complex gestures with his clawed hands. The movements were clearly deliberate, a form of communication that transcended species barriers. Luna stepped forward, placing herself between her human parents and the edge of the cliff. "They're not hunting us," she said, her young voice steady despite the chaos around them. "They're protecting us." "Protecting us from what?" Sarah asked, her knuckles white as she gripped her own improvised weapon, a kitchen knife she had grabbed during their escape from the mansion. The blade was small and inadequate, but it was sharp, and she held it with the desperate determination of a mother defending her child. Luna's answer came not in words but in the form of a shadow that passed over the twin sons. Michael looked up to see a sleek metal craft descending from the orange sky, its hull bearing the familiar symbols of Earth's military. The ship was massive, easily the size of a city block, its surface covered in weapon arrays and sensor equipment that spoke of military rather than scientific purposes. Agent Collins had followed them through the portal. The ship landed in the valley with a thunderous roar that shook the ridge beneath their feet, crushing several of the delicate spires. Beneath its bulk, armed soldiers poured out of landing bays, their advanced weapons cutting down the blue-skinned inhabitants who tried to flee. Energy beams lanced through the alien architecture, reducing centuries of artistry to glowing slag in seconds. The peaceful valley erupted into chaos as Earth's military turned it into a war zone. The energy weapons carved through the black stone as easily as they cut through flesh, leaving molten scars across structures that had stood for millennia. Blue-skinned civilians ran in panic, their phosphorescent patterns flashing in patterns that spoke of terror and confusion. "They're destroying everything," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face as she watched the slaughter below. "All of it. All this beauty, they're just destroying it all." But Luna's small hands clenched into fists, and Michael heard something dangerous in her voice when she spoke. Something that reminded him that despite her human appearance and mannerisms, she was not entirely of his world. Not everything, she said, and there was still in her young voice that hadn't been there before. The blue-furred hunter below made another series of gestures, more urgent this time. Luna nodded and turned to Michael and Sarah, her violet eyes blazing with determination that was startling in its intensity. He says there's a way to stop them, but we have to reach the heart of the city. The navigation chamber. What's a navigation chamber? Michael asked, though part of him already suspected the answer based on what Collins had told them about Luna's abilities. It's how people map the portals across the galaxy, Luna explained, already beginning to climb down the opposite side of the ridge. Her movements were sure and swift, as if she had climbed this route before in dreams or genetic memory. If I can reach it, I can close the gateway, trap them here, and us too, Sarah pointed out, struggling to keep up with her daughter's rapid descent. The implication hung heavy between them. Cutting off Earth's forces would also cut off any chance of returning home. Luna paused in her descent, looking back at them with those ancient violet eyes that held wisdom far beyond her years. When she spoke, her voice was calm but final. Yes, and us too. The journey down into the valley was a nightmare of smoke and screaming that would haunt Michael's dreams for years to come. The Earth soldiers had established a perimeter around their massive ship, using their energy weapons to create a killing field that extended in all directions. Bodies of blue-skinned civilians lay scattered across the ground, their phosphorescent patterns faded to gray in death, but the inhabitants were not helpless victims. As Michael watched in amazement, the survivors began to fight back with weapons that should have been primitive compared to Earth's technology. They used spears with tips carved from the same black stone as their buildings, arrows fletched with crystal feathers, swords that gleamed with inner light. Their primitive weapons should have been useless against modern armor and energy shields, but they fought with a desperate courage that began to tell against the invaders. Michael watched in amazement as a blue-skinned warrior, no taller than Luna, drove a stone-tipped spear completely through a soldier's protective vest. The soldier fell, his energy weapon sparking and dying as some property of the alien stone interfered with its power source. All around the valley, similar scenes played out as the defenders discovered that their stone weapons could penetrate Earth as technology. The energy shields that protected the soldiers flickered and failed when struck by the alien minerals, and their weapons began to malfunction as the very air around the stone formation became charged with interference. Their weapons run on energy cells, Luna explained as they pressed themselves against the wall of a ruined spire, the stone warm against their backs, but the stone here absorbs energy. That's why the spires can float, why the bridges stay up without support. The more they fire their weapons, the weaker they become. A group of soldiers rounded the corner of their hiding place, their weapons already beginning to flicker and fade as the surrounding stone drained their power. Michael stepped forward, his makeshift spear held ready in hands that shook with adrenaline and fear. He had been a college athlete once before wealth and comfort had made him soft, but now, with his daughter's life at stake, he remembered what it felt like to fight For something that mattered, the first soldier raised his dying energy weapon. But Michael was already moving with a speed and precision that surprised him. His spear took the man in the chest, the sharpened metal driving through Kevlar and flesh with sickening ease. The soldier fell backward into his companion's, blood spreading across his tactical vest as his weapon clattered to the ground. Sarah was beside Kim, her kitchen knife finding gaps in armor with surgical precision that spoke of desperation rather than skill. She moved like a wild animal, all teeth and claws, and maternal fury, stabbing and slashing at anything that threatened her child. They fought like parents protecting their young, and the soldiers trained for conventional warfare found themselves overwhelmed by the raw savagery of their defense. More soldiers were coming, drawn by the sounds of combat and the screams of their fallen comrades. But now the Blueford hunters had arrived, their massive forms charging through the smoke with bone-chilling roars that shook the ground. Beneath everyone's feet, the earth forces found themselves caught between hammer and anvil, their technological advantage evaporating like mist as their weapons failed and the alien stones sapped their power. The blue-furred creatures fought with intelligence and coordination that spoke of military experience. They used the terrain to their advantage, disappearing into the crystal forest only to emerge behind enemy lines with devastating effect. Their claws could tear through body armor like paper, and their teeth could crush through helmets and bones with equal ease. But it was their use of tools that truly marked them as more than animals. They wielded stone weapons with the same skills the blue-skinned humanoids, and Michael saw one of them operate what appeared to be some kind of catapult made from crystalline components, launching projectiles that exploded into clouds of energy-absorbing particles. Luna led them deeper into the city, following paths that seemed to shift and change with each step. The architecture here defied human understanding in ways that made Michael's head ache. Corridors opened onto vast chambers that should not have fit within the spires that contained them. Gravity seemed optional in some places, allowing them to walk up walls and across ceilings as if they were floors. How is this possible? Sarah asked as they climbed a staircase that spiraled through empty air, her voice tight with the strain of trying to process what her eyes were telling her. It's not magic, Luna said firmly, her small hand trailing along what might have been a banister made of solidified light. It's engineering. My people learned to manipulate space and gravity the same way humans learn to manipulate fire and metal, but it takes thousands of years to develop such knowledge. The staircase led them through a section of the cities that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Rooms folded in on themselves, creating spaces that were bigger on the inside than the outside. Windows showed views of starfields that couldn't possibly be visible from their current location. Doors open onto other doors, creating infinite corridors that somehow still led to definite destinations. Michael found himself thinking about the underground auction where they had found Luna, about the auctioneer's description of her as a specimen of unusual providence. How many others like her were scattered across Earth, hidden in government facilities or private collections? How many were still children, still small enough to be caged and studied like laboratory animals? The thought filled him with a rage that burned hotter than the alien suns. Overhead, Luna was a person, not a specimen. She had favorite foods and games she liked to play. She laughed at silly jokes and cried when she scraped her knees. She was their daughter in every way that mattered, and anyone who tried to reduce her to a tool or a weapon would have to go through him. First, they reached the heart of the city as the battle raged around them with increasing intensity. The navigation chamber was located in the center of the largest spire, a perfect sphere suspended in the middle of a cylindrical tower that stretched impossibly high above them. The sphere surface was covered in the same symbols that Luna drew on her walls, but these moved and shifted like living things, creating patterns that seemed to writhe and dance in the corner of his vision. The chamber itself defied physics in ways that made Michael's engineer training rebel against what he was seeing. The sphere hung 20 ft above them, connected to nothing but thin air, rotating slowly on axes that existed in more than 3 dimensions. Energy patterns flowed around it in streams of visible light, creating a light show that was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "I need to touch it," Luna said, staring up at the sphere with eyes that reflected its shifting patterns. "That's the only way to activate the navigation system." Michael looked around the chamber, his mind racing through possibilities. The walls were smooth stone, offering no handholds or obvious means of reaching the floating sphere. The ceiling was too high to reach, even if they could have figured out how to climb the walls, and every second they delayed, more of Luna's people died in the valley below. But scattered around the floor were the bodies of Bluekin defenders who had made their last stand in this chamber. Their stone weapons lay beside them, spears and arrows and swords carved from the same energy absorbing material that formed the city's architecture. "Sarah, help me," he said, gathering up the weapons with hands that moved faster than conscious thought. Working together, they began to build a crude pyramid, jamming the spears into cracks in the stone floor and lashing them together with strips torn from their clothing. It was dangerous work that required all of his engineering knowledge and more luck than skill. The weapons were not designed to be construction materials, and the pyramid swayed dangerously under its own weight. Above them, the sounds of battle grew louder as Earth forces pushed deeper into the city, their voices echoing through the chambers. Impossible acoustics. Energy weapons still flickered occasionally as soldiers found power cells that had not yet been drained by the alien stone, but their fire was sporadic and weak. More often, the sounds were of conventional weapons, gunfire and explosions that spoke of a conflict that had devolved into desperate close-quarters combat. The pyramid was barely tall enough when they finished, swaying dangerously under Luna's weight as she climbed toward the sphere. Michael and Sarah held the base steady, their hands slick with sweat and blood from their earlier fights. The improvised structure creaked and shifted, with every movement threatening to collapse at any moment. "Hurry," Sarah urged as the sound of boots echoed in the corridor outside the chamber. "They're coming." Luna reached the top of their makeshift construction and stretched toward the sphere, her small blue fingers extending toward the shifting symbols on its surface. The distance was almost too great, requiring her to balance precariously on the pyramid's peak while reaching across a gap that it seemed designed to prevent exactly what she was attempting. The doors to the chamber burst open, and Agent Collins strode in, flanked by a squad of soldiers whose weapons were reduced to bayonets and combat knives. His gray eyes took in the scene with cold calculation, noting the pyramid, the sphere, and the blue-skinned child, reaching desperately toward alien technology. Step away from the navigation device, he commanded, raising his sidearm, one of the few energy weapons that still functioned in the stone-saturated environment. The barrel glowed with a faint blue light that cast eerie shadows on the chamber walls. "She's just a child," Michael said, positioning himself between Collins and Luna. His makeshift spear felt inadequate against military training and superior weapons, but he held it steady. Despite the tremor in his hands, "She's a weapon," Collins replied, his voice carrying the flat certainty of someone who had never questioned his orders. "One that belongs to humanity now. Think about what we could accomplish with access to this technology. We could colonize other worlds, establish an interstellar empire that would last for millennia." Above them, Luna's hand pressed against the sphere surface, and immediately the chamber filled with light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The symbols on the sphere began to move faster, swirling in patterns that hurt to look at directly, and created after images that lingered long after the eye had moved away. Luna's blue skin began to glow with the same light that emanated from the symbols, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in dimensions humans couldn't perceive. "I am not a weapon," she said, her words echoing strangely in the chamber as if spoken by a choir of voices. "I'm a bridge, and I choose which worlds to connect." The sphere pulsed with energy that felt like standing next to a lightning strike, and every piece of technology in the chamber began to fail in spectacular fashion. The soldiers' weapons went dead in their hands, their electronic components fried by electromagnetic pulses that cascaded from the alien device. Collins' sidearm cracked and fell apart, its barrel glowing redot before crumbling to ash. Even their communications equipment sparked and died, leaving them cut off from the forces outside. The lights on their tactical gear went dark, their night vision systems failed, and the heads-up displays in their helmets flickered once and went permanently black. But the effect went beyond the chamber, beyond the spire, beyond the city itself. Luna's influence spread like ripples on a pond, touching every piece of Earth technology within a radius that encompassed the entire valley. The massive military ship that had brought Collins and his forces began to list as its engines failed, its hull plates buckling as structural integrity fields collapsed through the chamber's impossible windows. Michael could see the portal itself beginning to collapse, its edges folding in on themselves like a closing flower. The gateway between worlds was contracting, cutting the connection between this alien realm and Earth with the finality of a slamming door. "You're stranding us here," Colin said, his voice tight with rage as he realized what was happening. "You're cutting us off from everything, from home, from civilization, from humanity itself." "Yes," Luna replied simply, her small form silhouetted against the blazing sphere like a blue angel of judgment. "Just as you stranded me from Earth when you took me from my people as a baby." The portal collapsed with a sound like thunder, mixed with breaking glass, and suddenly the chamber was filled with blue-skinned figures who had arrived silently, while all attention was focused on Luna. They moved like ghosts appearing from shadows that shouldn't have been deep, enough to hide them there. Phosphorescent patterns dim with stealth, their scarification pulsed in. Complex rhythms that spoke of coordinated communication, a silent language of light that allowed perfect coordination without words. The largest of them, an elderly female with intricate scarification covering her blue skin like a living map of stars, stepped forward and spoke in a language of musical tones and subtle harmonics. Her voice carried layers of meaning that human ears could barely process, each word containing emotional and conceptual content that would require paragraphs to express it in English. The sounds were hauntingly clear as throat, beautiful, like whale song mixed with crystalline chimes, creating harmonics that made the chamber walls resonate in sympathy. Luna listened with the intensity of someone hearing their native language for the first time in years, her violet eyes bright with tears that reflected the sphere's shifting light. When the elderly female finished speaking, Luna nodded and replied in the same language, her words flowing with a fluency that spoke of memories older than her conscious mind. The conversation was brief but clearly profound. Generations of separation bridged in moments of musical communication. She says they have been waiting for one of their children to return. Luna translated her voice thick with emotion. They knew Earth had taken some of us, stolen us as babies for your experiments, but they could not follow without risking allow war between our worlds. The elderly woman's scarification shifted to patterns of deep blue and silver, colors that Michael somehow understood meant sadness and hope intermingled. She spoke again, her words carrying undertones of grief for the lost children and joy at finding one alive. She is Keeper Ashana. Luna continued, the guardian of the navigation chambers. She says they have tried for decades to retrieve their stolen children, but every portal they opened was detected and destroyed by your military before they could send rescue teams through. And now Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper as she stared at the assembled aliens who regarded them with expressions that seemed almost human in their complexity. Luna climbed down from the sphere, her small hand finding Michael's larger one, with the unconscious trust of a child seeking comfort from a parent. Now they want to know if I choose to stay here with my birth people or return to Earth with the family that raised me and loved me. The choice hung in the air between them like a physical weight that pressed down on all their shoulders. Michael looked around the chamber at the blue-skinned warriors who had appeared to escort their lost child home, at Agent Collins and his defeated soldiers who represented everything wrong with humanity's approach to the unknown, at his wife's tear-stained face that reflected his own anguish and uncertainty. They could stay here on this alien world where Luna would be among her own people, where she would never again have to hide what she was or fear being caged and studied like a laboratory animal. She could learn about her heritage, develop her abilities to their full potential, become whatever her people needed her to become, but they would be forever separated from everything they had ever known, aliens themselves in a world that might never fully accept them, or they could try to find another way home, knowing that Earth's governments would never stop hunting them, that Luna would spend her life looking over her shoulder and waiting for the next Agent Collins to appear at their door with a rest. warrants and sedative injectors. What do you want to do, Who? He asked. Luna, kneeling to meet her eyes as he had done countless times during bedtime. Stories and scraped knee incidents and all the small crises of childhood that now seemed so trivial compared to this moment. Luna looked at him for a long moment, her violet gaze searching his face as if memorizing every detail. Then she smiled, the same bright smile she had given him on Christmas morning when she was 5, the same smile that had melted his heart when she had first called him Daddy, the same smile that had made him understand that love truly could transcend species and circumstance. I want to go home, she said, clear as throat, her young voice steady with certainty, with my family. The elderly blue-skinned woman keeper Ashana spoke again, her musical voice carrying notes of sadness but also understanding. Her scarification shifted through patterns of acceptance and blessing, colors that spoke of difficult choices respected. Luna nodded and replied, their conversation flowing back and forth in the melodic language of her people. She says they understand, Luna translated, wiping tears from her glowing cheeks. They know what it means to be raised by another species, to have your heart divided between two worlds. She says it happened before, during the Great Diaspora, when her people were scattered across the galaxy by wars they couldn't win. Keeper Ashana gestured to the other blue-skinned figures and several of them stepped forward, their scarification pulsing and greeting. Luna spoke with each of them briefly, their conversations too rapid and complex for Michael to follow, even with translation. She says they can open another portal. Luna continued, but not to Earth. Too dangerous now that your government knows about the doorways and will be monitoring all the ancient sites, to a world where humans and my people once lived in peace before the wars drove us apart, a neutral world where we would be safe from both governments. Colin stepped forward, his face flushed with anger at seeing his mission collapse around him like a house of cards. I won't allow it. That technology belongs to Earth. These aliens have no right to. The blue-skinned warrior shifted, their weapons rising slightly, but it was Michael who moved first, his fist connected with Collins's jaw in a punch that had 3 years of frustration behind it, 3 years of watching his daughter hide what she was, 3 years of fear that someday someone exactly like Collins would come to take her away and reduce her to a specimen in a laboratory. The agent dropped like a stone, his unconscious form hitting the chamber floor with a satisfying thud that echoed off the impossible architecture. The soldiers made no move to help him, their weapons useless and their mission clearly failed. They stood in stunned silence, perhaps finally understanding the futility of their position. Technology doesn't belong to anyone, Michael said, flexing his bruised knuckles as he stood over Collins's prone form. It belongs to those wise enough to use it responsibly. Keeper Ashana made a complex gesture, and the walls of the chamber began to shimmer like heat mirages. Reality seemed to bend and twist, revealing glimpses of other worlds, other possibilities. Stars wheeled overhead in configurations that had never been seen from Earth's sky, and Michael caught sight of purple horizons and silver seas that spoke of places where peace might actually be possible. Through the shifting portal views, he could see cities where humans and Luna's people worked together, building spires that reached toward alien stars and tending gardens where Earth flowers grew alongside crystalline blooms. It was a vision of what could be, what had been before fear and mistrust had driven the species apart. "Are you ready?" Luna asked, taking both Michael's and Sarah's hands in her small blue ones. Her skin felt warm and alive, pulsing with energy that spoke of connection to forces beyond human understanding. Michael looked at his wife, seeing the same mixture of fear and determination in her eyes that he felt in his own heart. They had given up everything for this strange, wonderful child who had come into their lives through an underground auction in the depths of Los Angeles. They had lost their home, their wealth, their place in the world they had known, but they had gained something far more precious than any material possession. They had gained a family that transcended species, that crossed the gulf between worlds, that proved love could overcome any obstacle if it was strong enough and true enough. "We're ready," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the tears that streamed down her face. The portal opened like a flower of light, revealing a world of purple skies and silver seas where strange trees bore fruit that glowed like captured starlight, and creatures of impossible beauty danced in the gentle wind. It was a world where humans and Luna's people had once built cities together before pride and fear had driven them apart, before war had scattered them across the galaxy like seeds on a cosmic wind. As they stepped through the portal, Michael felt the last of his old life falling away like shed skin. Behind them, Agent Collins would wake to find himself stranded on an alien world with only stone weapons and his own ingenuity to keep him alive. Perhaps he would learn something from the experience about the value of cooperation over conquest. Perhaps not. It was no longer Michael's concern. The portal closed behind them with a soft E that seemed to echo across dimensions, and they stood together on the shores of an alien sea under unfamiliar constellations. Luna ran toward the water, her laughter echoing across the silver waves like music that spoke of joy and freedom and the endless possibility of new beginnings. The beach beneath their feet was composed of sand that shifted colors, with each step responding to their bioelectric fields with displays of light that created temporary auroras around their ankles. The water was warm and phosphorescent, each wave creating cascades of light that painted the purple sky with reflections of liquid stars. In the distance, lights began to appear as the inhabitants of this world emerged to welcome the newcomers. Michael could see figures approaching across the beach, some human, some blue skin, some that might have been neither or both. They moved together without the tension or mistrust that had characterized every interaction between the species on Earth. The first to reach them was a young woman with skin that shifted between blue and pale pink, depending on the light, her scarification forming patterns that incorporated both human and alien aesthetics. She spoke in accented English, her words carrying the musical undertones of Luna's birth language. "Welcome to Harmonia," she said, extending her hand in greeting. "I am Elena, daughter of Captain Rodriguez and healer T.A. Cheney. We have been waiting for refugees from the growing conflicts." Behind her came others, human children, with eyes that glowed like their alien playmates, elderly blue-skinned figures who wore clothing that mixed Earth fashions with crystalline accessories, couples who represented every possible combination of species and heritage. This was what integration looked like, when it was born of choice rather than conquest. How long have your people been here? Sarah asked, taking Alina's offered hand and marveling at the warmth and obvious humanity in her grip. 3 generations, Alina replied. Since the first conflicts began, and wise leaders on both sides recognized that some of us would always be caught in the middle. We have built something new here, something that belongs to all of us. Luna ran back from the water's edge, her arms full of shells that sang in harmonies when the wind touched them. Her skin glowed brighter than Michael had ever seen it, as if being surrounded by others like her had awakened capabilities that had lain dormant on Earth. Look, she said excitedly, holding up a shell that spiraled in impossible directions. They remember songs from before the wars. They can teach us music that bridges the spaces between stars. Over the following days, they learned about their new home and the communities that had flourished here. The planet itself was a marvel of terraforming, its atmosphere carefully balanced to support both human and alien physiology. Cities rose from the landscape like organic growths, their architecture blending the best of both cultures into something entirely new. The humans here had learned to work with crystalline technologies that responded to thought and emotion rather than mechanical input. The blue-skinned inhabitants had adopted human concepts of individual expression in democratic governance that had enriched their traditionally hierarchical society. Children grew up bilingual in both spoken English and the light language of scarification patterns. Michael found work helping to design new settlements that could accommodate the increasing number of refugees from both worlds. His engineering background proved invaluable when combined with alien understanding of space folding and gravity manipulation. Sarah established schools that taught human and alien children together, developing curricula that prepared them for a galaxy where multiple species would need to cooperate or face extinction. And Luna flourished in ways that would have been impossible on Earth. Her abilities, no longer suppressed or hidden, developed rapidly under the guidance of other children. Like her, she learned to navigate between worlds, not just physically but culturally, becoming a bridge between species in ways that went far beyond her technological capabilities. But their new life was not without challenges. The conflicts that had driven them here continued to escalate, and Harmonia received regular streams of refugees fleeing the growing violence. Some brought stories of Earth's government developing increasingly aggressive tactics for capturing alien children. Others spoke of blue-skinned worlds mobilizing for war against human expansion. Do you think we made the right choice? Sarah asked one evening as they watched Luna playing with a group of mixed-species children on the phosphorescent beach. The question had haunted both of them during quiet moments when the reality of their exile truly hit home. Clear's throat. Michael thought about the question as strain seabirds with translucent wings called overhead in harmonies that reminded him of Luna's birth language. He thought about the life they had left behind, the safety and comfort of their old world, the familiar routines of wealth and privilege that had insulated them from the universe's larger realities. He thought about Agent Collins in the facility where Luna had spent her earliest years, about the auction where They had found her and the buyers who had seen her as a commodity rather than a child. He thought about the inevitable wars that would come as fear and greed drove both species toward conflict. Then Luna called to them from the water's edge, holding up a shell that spiraled in impossible directions and glowed with its own inner light. Beside her stood children who represented the future, human, alien, and something entirely new that belonged fully to neither world and therefore might belong to all of them. Yes, Michael said, starting to ward his daughter across sand that sang beneath his feet. I think we made the perfect choice. As they walked down to the water together, the three members of their unlikely family, the lights in the distance grew brighter and more welcoming. They had found their place in a galaxy at war, a pocket of peace where love truly could transcend the boundaries between worlds. Luna's laughter echoed across the waves, joined by the voices of children who had never known the fear and mistrust that plagued their parent worlds. They were the future, these hybrid children of two species, and perhaps they would succeed where their elders had failed in building a lasting peace between the children of Earth and the children of distant stars. The alien sea lapped at their feet with water that tasted of silver and starlight, and overhead the purple sky stretched endlessly into infinity, vast and beautiful and full of hope for tomorrow. They had lost everything they thought they wanted, but in return they had gained everything they had never dared to dream of. Family united by choice rather than birth, a home built on love rather than conquest, and a future bright with possibility. And in the growing darkness of the galaxy, where two species circled each other like wary predators, Harmonia stood as proof that another way was possible. Children played together on beaches of singing sand, their laughter a defiant answer to the voices that preached fear and separation. Love had found a way, as it always did, and perhaps that would be enough to light the path forward for all of them. The stars wheeled overhead in configurations that spelled hope in languages both ancient and new, and three refugees from a dying peace stood together at the edge of an alien sea, watching their daughter run toward a future that belonged to all the children of the galaxy. They had made their choice, and in Clear's throat making it, they had chosen not just for themselves, but for everyone who would come after, everyone who would need to believe that love could indeed conquer all. Behind them the lights of Harmonia glowed like beacons in the gathering dusk, calling to other refugees, other families torn apart by the coming storm. And somewhere among those lights, in schools and hospitals and homes built by many hands, the future was being written by children who knew that the differences between species were less important than the bonds that united all thinking beings. It was not the end they had expected, but perhaps it was the beginning they had never dared to hope for. And in a galaxy growing dark with the promise of war, that beginning might be the most important thing of all. The portal collapsed with a sound like thunder, mixed with breaking glass, and suddenly the chamber was filled with blue-skinned figures who had arrived silently while all attention was focused on Luna. They moved like ghosts appearing from shadows that shouldn't have been deep enough to hide them, their phosphorescent patterns dim with stealth. The largest of them, an elderly female with intricate scarification covering her blue skin like a living map of stars, stepped forward and spoke in a language of musical tones and subtle harmonics. Her voice carried layers of meaning that human ears could barely process, each word containing emotional and conceptual content that would require paragraphs to express. In English, Luna listened with the intensity of someone hearing their native language for the first time in years, her violet eye bright with tears that reflected the sphere's shifting light. When the elderly female finished speaking, Luna nodded and replied in the same language, her words flowing with a fluency that spoke of memories older than her conscious mind. She says they have been waiting for one of their children to return. Luna translated her voice thick with emotion. They knew Earth had taken some of us, stolen us as babies for your experiments, but they could not follow without risking allo war between our worlds. And now, Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper as she stared at the assembled aliens who regarded them with expressions that seemed almost human in their complexity. Luna climbed down from the sphere, her small hand finding Michael's larger one, with the unconscious trust of a child seeking comfort from a parent. Now they want to know if I choose to stay here with my birth people or return to Earth with the family that raised me and loved me. The choice hung in the air between them like a physical weight. Michael looked around the chamber at the blue-skinned warriors who had appeared to escort their lost child home, at Agent Collins and his defeated soldiers, who represented everything wrong with humanity's approach to the unknown, at his wife's tear-stained face that reflected his own anguish. They could stay here on this alien world where Luna would be among her own people, where she would never again have to hide what she was or fear being caged and studied. She could learn about her heritage, develop her abilities, become whatever her people needed her to become, or they could try to find another way home, knowing that Earth's governments would never stop hunting them, that Luna would spend her life looking over her shoulder and waiting for the next Agent Collins to appear at their door. What do you want to do? He asked Luna, kneeling to meet her eyes as he had done countless times during bedtime stories and scraped knee incidents in all the small crises of childhood. Luna looked at him for a long moment, her violet gaze searching his face as if memorizing every detail. Then she smiled, the same bright smile she had given him on Christmas morning when she was 5, the same smile that had melted his heart when she had first called him Daddy, the same smile that had made him understand that love truly could transcend species and circumstance. I want to go home, she said, her young voice steady with certainty, with my family. The elderly, blue-skinned woman, who Michael realized must be some kind of leader or elder, spoke again, her musical voice carrying notes of sadness but also understanding. Luna nodded and replied, their conversation flowing back and forth in the melodic language of her people. She says they understand, Luna translated, wiping tears from her glowing cheeks. They know what it means to be raised by another species, to have your heart divided between two worlds. She says they can open another portal, but not to Earth, to a world where humans and my people once lived in peace before the wars drove us apart. Neutral world where we would be safe from both governments. Collins stepped forward, his face flushed with anger at seeing his mission collapse around him. I won't allow it. That technology belongs to Earth. These aliens have no right to. The blue-skinned warrior shifted, their weapons rising slightly. But it was Michael who moved first, his Fist connected with Collins's jaw in a punch that had 3 years of frustration behind it, 3 years of watching his daughter hide what she was. 3 years of fear that someday someone, exactly like Collins, would come to take her away. The agent dropped like a stone, his unconscious form hitting the chamber floor with a satisfying thud. The soldiers made no move to help him. Their weapons useless, and their mission clearly failed. Technology doesn't belong to anyone, Michael said, flexing his bruised knuckles as he stood over Collins's prone form. It belongs to those wise enough to use it responsibly. The elderly woman made a complex gesture, and the walls of the chamber began to shimmer like heat miragages. Reality seemed to bend and twist, revealing glimpses of other worlds, other possibilities. Stars wheeled overhead in configurations that had never been seen from Earth's sky, and Michael caught sight of purple horizons and silver seas that spoke of places where peace might actually be possible. "Are you ready?" Luna asked, taking both Michael's and Sarah's hands in her small blue ones. Her skin felt warm and alive, pulsing with energy that spoke of connection to forces beyond human understanding. Michael looked at his wife, seeing the same mixture of fear and determination in her eyes that he felt in his own heart. They had given up everything for this strange, wonderful child who had come into their lives through an underground auction in the depths of Los Angeles. They had lost their home, their wealth, their place in the world they had known, but they had gained something far more precious than any material possession. They had gained a family that transcended species, that crossed the gulf between worlds, that proved love could overcome any obstacle if it was strong enough and true enough. "We're ready," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the tears that streamed down her face. The portal opened like a flower of light, revealing a world of purple skies and silver seas where strange trees bore fruit that glowed like captured starlight, and creatures of impossible beauty danced in the gentle wind. It was a world where humans and Luna's people had once built cities together before pride and fear had driven them apart, before war had scattered them across the galaxy. As they stepped through the portal, Michael felt the last of his old life falling away like shed skin, clear his throat. Behind them, Agent Collins would wake to find himself stranded on an alien world with only Stone Age weapons in his own ingenuity to keep him alive. Perhaps he would learn something from the experience about the value of cooperation over conquest. Perhaps not. It was no longer Michael's concern. The portal closed behind them with a soft sigh that seemed to echo across dimensions, and they stood together on the shores of an alien sea under unfamiliar constellations. Luna ran toward the water, her laughter echoing across the silver waves like music that spoke of joy and freedom and the endless possibility of new beginnings. In the distance, lights began to appear as the inhabitants of this world emerged to welcome the newcomers. Michael could see figures approaching across the beach, some human, some blue-skinned, some that might have been neither or both. They moved together without the tension or mistrust that had characterized every interaction between the species on Earth. "Do you think we made the right choice?" Sarah asked, slipping her hand into Michael's as they watched their daughter play in the foam of an alien tide that tasted of silver and starlight. Michael thought about the question as strange seabirds with translucent wings called overhead in harmonies that reminded him of Luna's birth language. He thought about the life they had left behind, the safety and comfort of their old world, the familiar routines of wealth and privilege that had insulated them from the universe's larger realities. He thought about the unknown challenges that lay ahead on this strange new world, where humanity and Luna's people had once lived in harmony. There would be new languages to learn, new customs to understand, new dangers to face, but there would also be new wonders to discover, new friendships to build, new possibilities to explore. Then Luna called to them from the water's edge, holding up a shell that spiraled in impossible directions and glowed with its own inner light. Her blue skin seemed to shimmer in the light of the alien stars, and her violet eyes were bright with joy and wonder and the fearless curiosity of childhood. Yes, Michael said, starting toward his daughter across sand that sang beneath his feet. I think we made the perfect choice. As they walked down to the water together, the three members of their unlikely family, the lights in the distance grew brighter and more welcoming. Soon, Michael knew they would meet the people of this world, would begin the long process of building a new life in a place where Luna would never have to hide what she was or fear what others might do with her abilities. There would be challenges ahead, certainly new foods to learn to eat, new social structures to navigate, new technologies to master, but they would face them together as a family united by love rather than divided by fear, and perhaps in time they would help bridge the gap between their two species once again. Perhaps Luna's generation would succeed where their ancestors had failed, building a lasting peace between the children of Earth and the children of distant stars. The alien sea lapped at their feet with water that tasted of silver and starlight, and overhead the purple sky began to lighten with the approaching dawn of their new world. Luna's laughter echoed across the waves, a sound of pure joy that needed no translation, that spoke to the universal language of love and family and hope for the future. Michael and Sarah stood hand in hand as their daughter explored this new world with the fearless curiosity of childhood, and they knew that whatever lay ahead, they had made the right choice. They had chosen love over fear, family over safety, and the unknown over the familiar. They had chosen to follow their blue-skinned daughter into the vast and wonderful unknown, and in doing so they had found their true home at last, not in any particular place or world, but in the bonds that held them together, stronger than gravity, deeper than space, and more enduring than the stars themselves.